Welcome to Real Coaching Radio, the podcast for coaches by coaches. We are here to teach you how to get the most out of your clients and yourself. This is where beauty meets the beast, brains meet brawn, and science meets, well, bro science. Welcome to Real Coaching Radio. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever is listening and wherever you are in the world, whatever platform you are listening on. We hope that whatever time of day it is, that you have a good rest of your day. My name is Charlie and I am one half of this team. Me and my co-host Mark, today we are going to be talking and discussing the right to progress onto different exercises. We look at things like squats and deadlifts, which are pretty common in most gyms nowadays, and they are seen as quite easy movements, but they are very high skilled and there is a lot that goes into them. So today we are going to be talking about the right to progress onto exercises, the prerequisites for both the back squat and deadlift, and what you can do to get the most out of your training. So without any further ado, let's begin the show. When it comes to exercises that we see in the gym quite often, what do you see the most, which kind of brings this into your mind? What makes you think about people needing to understand the right to progress onto higher skill exercises? What have you seen, or what has kind of sparked this?
Yeah. So I think there's exercise is definitely becoming more popular. People are starting to participate in, when people go to the gym, if you go back to when I first started training, if you go back sort of like 15, 20 years ago and beyond that, if you went to the gym as such, people kind of went to just pretty much do bodybuilding. Now, obviously there was a lot of other stuff going on, like there's gymnastics, there's track and field, but generally, like if you went to go and do gymnastics, you went to a gymnastics club. Like you didn't really see anybody in a bodybuilding gym trying to do gymnastics. If you think about what a gym was, it probably was mostly kind of bodybuilding. Whereas nowadays, obviously with functional fitness kind of becoming, heading to the forefront of the industry to a certain extent, obviously bodybuilding is still very big, but from a commercial point of view, functional fitness is really starting to poke its head in the industry. And you see lots of other different training apparatus in a gym now. So there's lots of other training modalities coming into what we know as the gym, if you like. And obviously these are real high skilled movements that require a lot of proprioception, a lot of balance, a lot of stability, a lot of control, that people are trying to replicate in a gym scenario. And I think, and this isn't the case for everybody, but I think there's some misunderstanding nowadays around how actually skillful you need to be able to perform a back squat well, and how skilled you need to be able to perform a deadlift well, because I think they're kind of getting lost in this pool of real high skilled movements.
Yeah, I think because from what I've seen is when I first joined a commercial gym, it was machines everywhere and there was one squat rack, and you'd only see a handful of people doing movements like a squat and a deadlift, and that was only when I started, was probably 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, since that time, squats and deadlifts are so kind of in everyone's program and you see everyone doing them now. And I think actual work with barbells is something that probably kind of functional fitness has drove forward, because a lot of times it was just, like you say, when it was bodybuilding focused, there's machines everywhere, and people who kind of go to a gym who probably ain't not too sure what they're doing, they would kind of gravitate towards more machines. But now when you look on social media, there are so many people using barbells, doing deadlifts, doing squats, doing kind of high skill movements, that then kind of your regular gym goer goes to do some of those movements, or a PT will show someone how to do those movements. And I think it kind of gets lost on how important they are and how important it is to learn those as skills.
Yeah. So, and I completely agree. Like barbell work and dumbbell or free weight work in general, if you like, is becoming way more popular, especially within functional fitness. A lot of functional fitness gyms don't really have machines in them anymore. And yeah, some people are coming in and they're just like, whether they're an exerciser or whether they're a PT, and this isn't everybody. Obviously there are coaches and there are people who train that have the same sort of kind of thought processes that we're going to talk about today. But I think there are also a lot of people that come in just like, have you squatted before? Or do you know what a back squat is? Just like, oh yeah, that's the thing with the bar on my back and I just, bend down and stand up again. Or do you know what a deadlift is? Just like, yeah, I kind of like just pick it up off the floor. And it's probably that sort of mentality that's driving potentially poor movement patterns. And I just feel like unless you're in like probably a powerlifting world, squats, deadlifts, and other quote unquote basic strength exercises probably don't really get the respect that they deserve anymore.
Well, my biggest example of that was the first time I ever went to a like CrossFit gym was walked in, the workouts on the board, and it was we're gonna do like 1 rep max heavy back squat. And this was my first time going to the gym, and of like that CrossFit gym. Obviously, I've been before. I've trained back squats loads, so for me to go in and do a back squat 1 rep max, it wasn't a problem. And then after that, it was now we're going to work up to a set of 3 on cleans or something. And for me, that was I up until that point I'd done cleans twice before, and probably very dreadfully. And the when I walked into that gym, there was no questioning and no kind of direct coaching on me, direct watching of me, because obviously it was a group setting, group class. And that's the bit that I kind of worry about, is that you have people going in, and even if you just go into a gym floor on your own to do squats, if you're not sure and if you don't have the prerequisites in place, then getting to actually do those movements can be quite dangerous.
Yeah, so absolutely. And there's got to be like some movement prerequisites that you need to be able to hit before you have this right to progress onto either another exercise or to be able to put weight on the bar. So it'd be and I think another reason why some of this kind of becomes a bit of an issue in the fitness industry, because we're so used nowadays to we want stuff immediately. We're not really willing to put the work in to get stuff. And this applies to pretty much anything in the world, but specifically across the health and fitness spectrum in terms of, people want like a 6-week transformation. They want to like rapidly change their body in 6 weeks. People want a 12-week transformation. They want to know where they're going to be within 1 month. And people want stuff yesterday rather than, okay, so where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 10 years? So people want to rush their progress. And if it's rushing their progress in some of these exercises, so take back squat, 1 rep max deadlifts and that kind of stuff, like these are exercises where you can move the most amount of weight. So not only can you potentially build poor movement patterns, moving the most amount of weight, and once you've learned a movement pattern, it's much harder to unlearn and relearn how to move compared to what it would be to learn how to move correctly in the first place. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is because you can move so much weight with some of these exercises, if you're doing them poorly, your risk of injury just massively increases.
I think I've seen so many people with that mentality of let's lift as much weight as we can, and kind of form goes out the window. And I've always said, don't ever sacrifice form for the amount of weight you put on the bar, because an exercise, if you look at everything as a skill, and if you look at everything as having a kind of a role to play out of your toolbox, for example, if you're pulling a deadlift out, then a deadlift has muscles that it uses, and it has a certain way that it needs to be done to be performed correctly. So you have to perform that exercise the way it's intended to be performed in order to get the benefits out of it. And not understanding the basics of just hip hinging means that when you do round you round from your lower back, which means that you have so much, you're so compromised from the start that you could put a tiny amount of weight on it and you're at risk. Let alone people that I see with dreadful form putting 200 kg on the bar, and it's just like, do you? I don't know if people genuinely understand the risk of it and genuinely understand, because when you go into a gym which is very that'll do, very much got the mentality of, well, that'll do, just get the weight up type thing, then that kind of promotes ignoring what skills you actually need, what prerequisites you need, because the ego kind of kicks in and, well, I've got to lift the most amount of weight. If I don't lift the most amount of weight, then and that ego mentality of these ego lifts, which then you risk injury.
Yeah, and it's that'll do mentality that it is part of the problem. You know, people just, oh, it's a deadlift, and you know, if I get it from the floor and then I end in full extension, then you know I've performed a deadlift. But like, how have you got from A to B?
Yeah.
Like, and that's a big thing. And then also and I use some of these training tools and some of these aids within my training. We've also got to look at, you know, the options that we have and the tools that we have when we are training. So take deadlifts as an example. You know, we've got belts, we've got wrist wraps. When you're squatting, you've got knee wraps. Like, and if you really wanted to, you've got powerlifting suits, you know. And all of this stuff is, all it's really doing is allowing you to move more weight than what you're actually able to move. Because take wrist wraps as an example when you're doing deadlifts and those kind of things. And yeah, okay, they will have some benefits to what they're doing. But for what we're talking about right now, in terms of, you know, it's going to allow you to move more weight than your body can actually physically really start to move, because these wraps are keeping that bar attached to you. And there's this possibility that your injury risk is going to increase. And that skill that you were talking about earlier, I think is really, really important, because if we consider why most people want to come to the gym and why most people want to start training, you know, and this is a bit of a blanket statement, but it's generalizing a little bit, but most people, in my experience with training clients, and I've been doing that for a very long time now, most people, when they come to a gym, they want some form of body transformation. They either want to lose some weight, they either want to gain some muscle mass and get stronger, or they want a mixture of both. Now, in order for these people to achieve that, when they come to the gym, they're going to need to start producing some form of output. So that, you know, that there's an output that's required. There's a level of work capacity that's required, so that they can either create some metabolic stress within the muscle and cause some muscular damage to increase hypertrophy and create mechanical tension within the muscle, or they're going to need some form of high output to increase their calorie expenditure, so that has an impact on their overall calorie expenditure, and therefore has an impact on them being in a calorie deficit to be able to assist in their weight loss journey. So there is some form of output to all of this. However, if you don't have the skill to perform things like a back squat well, or things like a deadlift well, you're not going to be able to use these exercises towards increasing output, because you're either not going to be able to put the amount of weight on the bar that's required to create the metabolic stress that you're looking for, or create the mechanical tension that you're looking for, or you're not going to be able to perform the set for long enough before your form starts to break down to, again, create metabolic stresses within the muscle to get the adaptation that you're looking for. So the skill is a massive prerequisite to be able to you know, have the right to use that exercise to produce output, whether that's to gain strength, to increase calorie expenditure, to create metabolic stress within the muscle tissue. You know, you need to have this skillful level there first.
And that's the one thing that I see a lot of people misunderstanding when it comes to the skill, because the skill you learn is so much internal, and how you move your body, and so much pretty much how your mind communicates to your body. So how can you get yourself in the right positions? How can you tell yourself to make sure that you are, and your form is kind of optimal? And that's the difficulty that I see a lot of people get in, is the skill bit and the prerequisites and the movements beforehand get dropped. So it's not actually that, it's not that appealing and it's not that glamorous to walk in and to go, right, I need to learn how to keep this is upright torso, how I need to learn how to keep a nice posture when I go in to do my squat. So to go in and just grab a 2.5 kg kind of plate and do a counterbalance squat, one of the very first times you go into the gym, especially if you're a man, because ego kicks in all the time. So to walk in and do that, it can be quite humbling. But if you don't start there, then at some point you're going to have to return to that point to move forward anyway. And that's the bit that bugs me, is that people think that by doing these prerequisites, they're actually losing time, but you are gaining so much by starting at the very beginning. If you start halfway along this journey, at some point you're going to get either injured or you're going to get lost. Or you're going to realize that you've got to return to this place to learn the correct movement patterns. And I think that's the thing, is like, where should we, what are the correct movement patterns? Where do I start with this? And that's what you need to do before you go in and picking these high skill movements.
Yeah, and I think that I've seen that so many times. Like the amount of people that I have seen who have either got injured doing an exercise, to take a back squat as an example, or they're struggling to progress the weight that's on their back squat. And in order for them to be able to progress or not get injured again, we've had to change, when I coach them, we've had to change how they move. And you're right, it is really humbling because they're coming back to, and I've had plenty of people kind of, when I'm coaching people, they come in just like, right, I want to get stronger. And we might start with some sort of squatting motion. I say, right, have you back squatted before? And they say, yes. It's right. Okay, what can you back squat? I don't know. And I genuinely had people say like 120, 130, 140, 4 reps. And I'll say, okay, so let's start warming up. Let's see what your back squat looks like. And they get up towards 100 and they're moving inches. Like, they're descending 2.5 inches into this back squat with a rounded spine and then standing back up again. It's just, and in order for us to be able to perform a good back squat, I've taken that kind of like 120 down to 30. and to be honest, it probably could still be better.
Yeah. So
it is, just because people come into the gym and say, yes, I've done this before and I can move this amount of weight. Like if you're a coach, you're the professional, you're the exercise professional. Don't be afraid to kind of start stripping that back down, because you're right in what you said in terms of people will get so far in the journey and they will always generally have to come back to the start. And that's so like one of our taglines for Origin Series is like where fitness begins. And the reason we come up with that tagline is because most of the time with most of my clients, to allow them to progress at the beginning, and whether I've done this with them knowing because we've got that relationship, or whether there's some sort of ego thing in the way and I've had to hide it in some of their sessions, but one way or another with most of my clients, I've had to regress them.
Yeah. So I've had the reason I laugh is because I've done this myself so much, and I remember I think I was 18 and we just started deadlifting, and I had no idea what I was doing, if I'm completely honest with you. But within a 6-month period, I kind of got my deadlift from what was a dreadful 140, and I attempted a 200 kg deadlift, right? And I had no right.
From 140 to 200.
Basically, in 6 months, I got it from 140 to 200, and I had no right being there. And the reason I laugh is because I've got a video on my laptop of me attempting this 200, and and the classic looking like a cat. I genuinely, my back is, I don't know if any part of my posterior chain actually worked during that, but it was so horrible. I hurt my back. I had to spend 6 months doing absolutely nothing apart from like curls, because I couldn't do anything because my back was so bad. I had to work on my mobility, I had to work on positioning, and from that point was when I went, there's something wrong about this, because the worst bit about that was there are people within that gym who have been training for probably 20 odd years screaming at me to get the bar up. And that's the bit that's the problem is, and it's same, it goes, like you said, to coaches. If you're a coach or if you're someone who is more experienced, you do have a right, and you do have, I suggest, saying something, because especially if you're a coach, if you see something, say something, because that's something I had to learn really, really quickly, was that it can be quite difficult to challenge someone, and it is a difficult conversation. But if you don't, at some point, they're going to get injured. And if you're the coach, that falls onto you. And if you're someone watching and you turn around and go, yeah, well, I kind of knew that was going to happen, they're not going to be very happy. They would be a lot happier to take the ego hit and regress the exercise and do it correctly, I think.
Yeah. And I think for some coaches, like, that is a challenge, especially if, like, the person that's, whether it's a client or whether it's just somebody that you see in the gym that you're working in, whatever it is, especially if the person that's moving the weight is potentially stronger than you are. So let's take a deadlift as an example. Someone's trying to deadlift 200, 250, and you can only deadlift like 150, 160, whatever, which is obviously, still a good amount of weight to move. But if this person that's deadlifting is stronger than what you are, I do think for some coaches there's a barrier, especially if it's male to male. There's a barrier where they feel like they can't go up and either offer advice and offer help to this person because they're seen as stronger and like they're this more alpha position.
That's a difficult situation to be in.
Yeah.
And I've been in it myself, where I've seen a powerlifting kind of group of friends lifting, and there's one person in there that has no right lifting the same weights, and that is a really difficult conversation to have. I've had the conversation, and I've had to kind of go over to someone who, look, my max deadlift and my form broke down on it was 220 when I done mine, and this guy's, his max, he was doing like 240, 250. Again, no right to be there. Absolutely no right to be there. And to have the conversation and to say that you really need to strip yourself back before you, and I think the biggest thing is you have to proposition it as if you are trying to help them, but you don't want to seem as if you're just trying to hinder their process or you're jealous, because that's what they'll think. They'll think you are.
Yeah, ego. We're in an egotistical industry anyway, so when it comes to males and strength, then it just becomes a whole new level.
Yeah.
Like, now, don't get me wrong. Like, everybody enjoys like a big hype session where the music's banging and you're trying to move the most amount of weight that you can. Like, everybody enjoys that sort of stuff if you're into resistance training, but like that's not how you should train day in, day out. Like, that's not training.
Yeah, I think so. If you do have to approach someone and you do have to say something, my biggest advice is for you to kind of explain what could happen. And even if it hasn't happened to you, use yourself as an example. Because the way I did it and the way I kind of approached someone, and I said, I was exactly the same. I got injured and then I couldn't lift anything for 6 months. That will kind of resonate with someone a lot more, because by saying that I really hurt myself, I couldn't lift. And if they are someone who is very interested in the gym, if it is someone who can lift kind of north of 160, 170 on a deadlift, then 9 times out of 10 they've been going to the gym for a while, they enjoy it. So by saying to them you won't be actually able to train is kind of a big pull. So when you do approach someone, just say that you have to be careful. If it is someone who you don't have any rapport with, build that rapport before, because going in and just being, look, mate, you deadlift shit. It's not gonna
go down very well.
No, you're not gonna get anywhere. So we've spoke about prerequisites. Now, when it comes to deadlifts and back squats, what movements would you make sure a client can do before we go in? So if we start with back squatting, what movements would you suggest a client or a trainer use?
Yeah, so I think we'll dig into like that exact answer in a second, but before that, like even a step further this, and this might not, and some of this will relate to some like squats and deadlifts, but probably a little bit more to some of the upper body movements and exercises. You know, and I own a functional fitness gym, so in terms of like, we don't have any machines in our gym, but I think machines do also have their place, because you said earlier in this chat about, you know, people before they go anywhere, people being able to like find that coordination internally. And I think that's a really good point. And machines allow people to be able to do that, because with the machine, you're provided with external stability, because the machine is providing you with external stability, which therefore means you need to start creating internal stability. So you start creating internally how stable you are and how well your system moves together. Whereas when you start coming into free weights, you have no external stability. So not only are you needing to create internal stability, but you're having to stabilize this external thing, being the barbell. So there might be a situation where machines might be the first place that people go. Yeah. Outside of that, I think when it comes to things like squatting and deadlifting, so one of the first things I get people to do with squats would either be some form of counterbalance squats, whether that be with they use a kettlebell, so they use some sort of goblet squat, or the counterbalance is right out in front, or they use a plate, or they simply just use their arms and put their arms out in front. Because one of the biggest things that we're trying to do with skilled exercises is essentially like maintain center of mass over their base of support. Because if we start to deviate center of mass away from base of support, then we're outside of base support. That's why people either fall over or things just aren't really going to move very well. So in some situations, you might need to increase their base of support. So we make their levers longer. We put their arms out in front. They have a wider base of support. That will hopefully make the movement a little bit easier. From then, like really early on, either starting there or starting with some form of goblet squat would be where I would start with squats.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest example of kind of the reason we want everything to be over this base of support is the more you deviate out from that, the kind of more at risk you are, and the more your muscles have to work. And the easiest example of that is you could hold a 5 kg kettlebell kind of down by your side with your arm just dangling there, and you could probably hold it there for quite a while. You lift your arm up in front of you. How long does it take before your arm starts to ache, before your lower back starts to ache? That's the point. The kind of center of mass has moved. That weight has moved out in front of you. Whereas if it's down by the side, it's real easy to hold it there. You don't have to move much. That's the job of your body, of your muscles.
Yeah. And then with things like deadlifts, I would probably start with, unloaded, just some sort of like wall touches. So we're just focusing on that hip hinge, making sure that they can drive those hips backwards, and getting their backside to touch a wall. So we're just looking at whether they can actually hinge before they move any weight.
So hip hinging for me is one of the hardest things to sometimes teach people, because if as soon as I ask a client, someone who's never exercised before, can you perform a hip hinge for me? They will squat. And then anytime I ask someone to squat, they hip hinge. So like the wall touch is brilliant. One of the things that I use is a PVC pipe connected basically to your bum, like / coccyx area, your kind of upper back, and then like connected to your head. So there's bars behind you, and from that you just have to hip hinge. So hinge from your hips and keep that PVC pipe connected to all of these points. Because learning a hip hinge and keep this stability kind of in your upper body is really important. So that's something you can do as well.
Yeah, and the good thing with that PVC pipe drill that you were just talking about is that the client's getting constant and instant feedback.
Yeah.
So, because again, you're right, I also see what you said in terms of, you ask people to hinge and you get some sort of knee flexion, you get some kind of squat motion. You ask somebody to squat and you get this hip hinge motion. And so people struggle to dissociate joint movements, but people also struggle to dissociate hip flexion with spinal flexion.
Yes.
Whereas if they've got this PVC pipe running down their spine, they've got these 3 points of contact and need to maintain those 3 points of contact, they're going to instantly get feedback if they're starting to go into spinal flexion, because they're going to lose contact at one of those points.
Exactly. And that's so another thing that I've done, because some people, and don't be surprised about this. Some people genuinely have no idea how to move their body, and we have to give them cues. And the things that machines do is give them those cues, but you can also do that yourself. So with the PVC pipe, but also if you put a band around the kind of rig and put that band in their hip crease, and then get them to do this movement, the band is going to pull them backwards. That band is going to pull in the position it needs to be kind of moving, where our body needs to move. And that gives them, again, another kind of feedback to learn how to do that movement. And I genuinely would do sets of this before I do anything. And my first session is genuinely, right, let's teach you how to hinge. Let's teach you how to squat.
Yeah, so and using tools like that to give clients feedback is really, really useful to the client, because there's many reasons why people can't do specific exercises. And within the fitness industry, you know, we kind of we pin a lot of things down to people are tight through specific areas. They don't have the range of motion, and that's not always the case, you know. But you know, sometimes there is tightness in areas, but we often go down this route of, you know, people are either tight and they can't get into the positions to be able to perform the movement. People are either weak because they lack the strength to be able to produce the force to go through these movements. But the biggest reason why some people can't perform exercises is because they lack motor control, and they lack the skill to be able to do it. More than likely, simply because they've never done it before. They lack the skill to do it. And I think as coaches, if you're a coach that's kind of like just coming into the fitness industry, or you've potentially been in the fitness industry a while, and you've been training for a while, there is a possibility that you can move a little bit better than your client. So we take for granted that doing things like lunges, doing things like squatting and all these other movements are really, really easy to do. And then we get general population clients coming into the gym and almost assume that people can do these movements. Whereas a lot of people can't, especially when it comes down to things like lunging and hip hinging. They're two of the biggest movements I see where people really start to break down in movement patterns. To some people, they're seen as quite simple movements, but in reality, they're fairly complex for people to understand.
Yeah. So you've gone through the PVC pipe. You've done your wall touches. You've kind of learnt that initial hip hinging motion. From there, loading weights up. I normally go to a dumbbell Romanian deadlift and then a barbell Romanian deadlift.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of similar. So I will go there, or I will go to some form of like elevated kettlebell deadlift. So I might stack a few plates up and then, you know, stick a kettlebell on top of the plates so that the kettlebell is elevated from the floor, so that again that it's a shorter range of motion. It's now they're starting to have external load and get the feedback from the load in those positions. So, but a very similar, you know, for very similar reasons why you're using dumbbell Romanian deadlift.
Well, that's the kettlebell deadlift. There is when I teach people. That's literally how I go, because then I go into if I'm teaching someone, say, a sumo rather than a conventional, then I will get a kettlebell out so I can do that, because I think part of the problem as well, luckily here we have 15 kg female bars, but you go into a lot of commercial gyms, they've just got the 20 kg male bar. So if you're taking someone from just a hip hinge to 20 kg loaded, that can be risk.
Or even if they've got, well, probably not the case if they've got 15 kilo bars, because they're probably a fairly well equipped gym, but some people might have a 20 kilo bar, and let's say people can move a 20 kilo bar and need a little bit of weight. A lot of time, the 5 kilo weights, these small tiny ones that you see in bodybuilding gyms. So again, like the barbell is like so close to the floor, people really struggle to get into good positions.
Yeah, you making sure that the barbell's at the correct height when you're doing a deadlift is going to be really crucial for when you go and train clients and teach them how to do stuff like that. That's one of the things that you need to kind of either elevate it, and that's why a kettlebell is so good, because a kettlebell, again, you can elevate it on plates, but 9 times out of 10 it brings you up to the correct height.
Yeah.
So we've done deadlifting, back squatting, we've done counterbalance and a goblet. Where would you go from a goblet squat?
So from goblet squat, like if people can goblet squat well, I generally go to front squat. Now that's counterintuitive to some people, and but there's a reason I go to front squat. And this doesn't necessarily mean that people need to get into a front rack position in terms of what you see in, take CrossFit as an example, or Olympic weightlifting, those, and that type of front rack position. People can also use either, you may have seen it before, people use like deadlift straps on the bar, just because obviously the thing with front squatting as well, there's now other positions that need to come into play in terms of not only their thoracic position, which is important when it comes to back squatting as well, but there's this shoulder range of movement that people need to get into, there's this elbow range that people need to get into, so there's more challenges for people. So we can either use some straps to remove some of that challenge, or people can do front squats the way bodybuilders sometimes do front squats with their arms across the bar. But the main reason I go to front squat from there before I go anywhere else is because in order for you to perform a good front squat, you need to be able to maintain a good upright torso.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I see a lot of people that cannot do it. Some people, it is just genuinely anatomy. Like if you have someone who is just really tall, really long legs, then sometimes they may not have the kind of range of motion in their ankles to be able to get that low. So a lot of their kind of, to get any type of depth, it is a lot of hip hinge. But by doing a front squat first, you promote trying to keep this upright torso. Yeah,
and actively trying to engage that whole trunk and that whole thoracic area within their spine as well. And then from front squat, I would either go to back squat depending on who the client is, or again depending on what their goals are, I would potentially for some clients stick an overhead squat in between front squat and back squat, because again it just challenges people to maintain that upright torso position. Because the reality is, if you can overhead squat, and I'm not talking overhead squatting, body weight or loads of weight, I'm talking with an empty barbell. If you can overhead squat, the likelihood of you being able to back squat increases.
And I think that's the crucial thing there is, it depends. With all clients, with all people, it depends on who you're working with, on what exercise kind of you go to. But either way, you should have these prerequisites in place before you get to that stage.
Yeah.
And by doing something like a counterbalance squat, by doing something like a hip hinge, you can see where people break down, and you can get them to talk to you and tell you where they kind of, if they feel any discomfort, if it feels awkward, can they send their knees over their toes anymore? Can they send their hips back a little bit more? And using kind of your cues, using the ability to cue people into positions is going to be really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally it would be that back squat. So same with deadlift, the thing that is at the end of this progression of movement patterns is the exercise where you can move the most amount of weight. That is last. You need to earn your right to get there.
And as soon as you get there, don't think you now have the right to stack the bar, because you have to earn that right as well. Putting weight on the bar, lifting more weight, you should never sacrifice form for the amount of weight you put on the bar, because then you are not doing the movement and not getting the benefit out of the movement you could do. So make sure you earn the right by going through all of these regressions before you get to a back squat or to a deadlift.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when I get to back squat, like in terms of what you're saying there, it's exactly that. So even when I get to back squat with a lot of clients, I generally start with some form of tempo based movement. So there'll be a slower eccentric. There might be some pauses in there, because again, like we're trying to ensure that the reason people generally move through movements quickly is because they know subconsciously themselves that they don't have the control to be able to perform this well. So they're just trying to get it over with as quickly as they can. So I get, so we slow that eccentric down. We add pauses at the bottom. We ensure that we're in the correct positions before we start adding any additional load onto that.
Yeah, and ultimately it's because of things like it's because of CrossFit environments and environments that you see a lot of people and a lot more people than you would have done even when I first started doing Olympic lifts, doing these real high skill movements, which makes things like back squats and deadlifts seem kind of as if they aren't a skilled movement.
Yeah.
But these movements are something which, I mean, a deadlift is just picking something off of the floor. A squat is just sitting down onto a chair and standing back up. And these are the things that we do in daily life, these functional movements that are really important to learn these patterns and learn these kind of internal cues for yourself. And it is really important to learn the skill. So if you're going to look at these exercises as anything, look at them as skills, look at them as something that you need to learn and you need to be able to perform correctly.
Yeah. And then, and strength itself is a skill. So when you've mastered that movement and you're starting to add weight onto the bar, like remember that just because you've gained the skill of being able to squat a little bit better, to be able to add more weight to the bar now as well, strength is also a skill. And you're right, like there's some stuff that's going on in the fitness. I think like a few years ago on the CrossFit regional events, there was some kind of like handstand walk with a medicine ball between your legs. And if you look at that, to the general public, if you look at that and then look at a back squat or a deadlift, like they don't really seem comparable. And obviously they're not comparable because they are two very different things. But from a skill level, one looks like it belongs in the circus and the other one looks like it does belong in a gym. But being able to squat and deadlift well is absolutely a skill.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing is if you're going into a gym and you maybe because watching things like the Open, watching kind of these high skill events, it is quite appealing to be able to want to go and do that. That's a lot of times we get kind of inspired by seeing other people do things, but understand that they got there by doing all of these prerequisites. Yeah. They got there by learning all of these skills. And you can't skip any part of this process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like, that's a really important point because like we're not here to like slam on CrossFit because, we work in a functional fitness facility ourselves. So without CrossFit, realistically, like functional fitness probably wouldn't be as big in the fitness industry as it is now. So they've done us all a favor, but with that, when you see social media, what you see people posting on social media is, 1 rep max snatch or 1 rep max back squat potentially, or all these other high skilled, 20 to 30 unbroken bar muscle ups, like really high skilled movements. What you don't see is like Li Xiaojun, one of the best weightlifters in the world, like spending loads and loads and loads of time with an empty barbell.
Yes. Because
people don't want, like, the general public probably don't want to watch that.
No.
But don't think that they're not doing it.
If it's not appealing, it's not glamorous, it's not what you see on social media, because that's ultimately where we get our comparison from, is they're doing this, which means they must train like that. And you've said it many a time before, what you see people doing in a competition is not how they train. It is completely different.
Yeah.
So I think that covers everything that we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you do kind of like the podcast, obviously give us 5 stars would be amazing. Please subscribe if you're already not. We obviously here kind of we want to talk about weightlifting, we want to talk about lifting weights, we want to talk about general public coaching and the important things to us. And this podcast is mainly about giving coaches kind of the armor in their the kind of tools in their toolbox to help them to coach clients and to help you, as if you are just a general public without a coach, learn how to do exercises correctly, learn the way you should be training and the things that is going to give you longevity in your training. So if you do want to find us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at Mark Origin Series. You can find me at Charlie RJ Hacker. For any educational content, you can go to origin_series_online and at Hat the Body, Hat the Mind. and you can find us there. But thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you on the next one. So thank you very much for tuning in. Now, what we spoke about today about regressing exercises and actually having the prerequisites in place and actually earning the right to exercises is something that we try to ingrain in our members down at Origin Athletic. So Origin Athletic is a gym in the centre of Bristol, and we very much want you guys to come down once the gyms are reopen and once we are out of this kind of crazy lockdown scenario that we're in currently. So thank you very much for tuning in. If you did like the podcast, then please give us 5 stars. It does help. If you do want to connect to us, then by all means, you can send an email to us, info@realcoachingradio.co.uk, or you can kind of follow us on social media. So thank you very much, and we will see you on the next one.